a warm welcome.
Here, you can have my seat. How's that?
That's great.
Just leave all that there. Hi, everybody.
Hey, Brian.
I'm going to try it with the hat on. I'm an alcoholic. My home group is the Thursday night study group, and my name is Brian. And it is Brian Haynes, now that we already have to bleep it from the recording. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me. It'd be a lousy meeting if it were just me. So we're at step 8 tonight, right? Is that what we're going to do? We didn't just pick step 8 out of a hat. We have been together for 10 weeks, covering 8 steps. We missed 2 weeks because of the storm. Man, a lot has happened this week. Really, a lot has happened this week that we don't talk about in AA, but it leaves a lot of people on our minds and on our hearts, our prayers. Anyway, just wanted to say that. We're talking about spiritual principles. We're talking about the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I sometimes feel like, when we talk about these spiritual principles, sometimes the conversation, as I hear myself talk or listen to a conversation, it almost sounds like we came into AA crushed by this self-imposed crisis, and then, all of a sudden became goody two-shoes and got on our high horse, and you know what I mean? Sometimes the way we hear about, these spiritual principles taught. And so I'm reminded that in this conversation, in the conversation of trying to grow closer to my Creator, and the conversation of trying to move towards God's will for me, that there's a compelling reason. There was a compelling reason that drew me to Alcoholics Anonymous, that drove me to Alcoholics Anonymous, and there's a compelling reason why I stay here and keep trying to be better at seeking God's will for my life using these 12 steps. And that compelling reason is I'm dead if I don't. I mean, that's my reality. I mean, I don't know how many people can would affirm that for themselves. I'm sure that even those that wouldn't are probably close if they're in this room. But I'm dead. I'm dead otherwise. I was 125 pounds the last time that they arrested me. I am 6'3". I weigh 265 right now. I don't look good at 125 pounds. I don't look good at 265 either, to be honest with you. But at 125 pounds, I'm almost dead. And I was the second time that year I had been arrested in that condition. Just 9 months before, I was arrested in Pompano Beach weighing 127 pounds. I don't know if I'm alive at 123 pounds. So that's the reason that I was driven to Alcoholics Anonymous. That's the reason why I eventually opened up my ears and my mind and listened to people in Alcoholics Anonymous. Even that didn't come right away. Even given that start, I was still not a good listener. I still did not listen very well. And so, I missed what this whole thing was about for a little while. Looking back on it and looking back at all of the people that I've had the opportunity to know in Alcoholics Anonymous and see recover, and those that haven't, I know that the way that I participated my first year plus in Alcoholics Anonymous, most people who participate that way are not telling a story about how they're still sober 20 some odd years later. Most of them aren't telling that story. So I was hard-headed. I did not listen well. And because of that hard-headedness, because I'm not a very good listener by nature, I've become a good listener. I actually have. I've actually prided myself on, I have become a good listener. But because I didn't start out as a good listener, I did things the hard way and the long way. And it was all, looking back at it, it was not the best way to do it. And here's the thing. I say that because I like to share my struggles with understanding and doing the steps as part of how I do them. And so we've been on that journey together. Those of you who have been here for the last 10 weeks, we've talked about how I didn't understand that I was powerless. And really, the whole thing never got off the ground for me. This whole spiritual program never got off the ground. Even though I believed in God and was willing and ready to do, I thought the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. What I really was willing to do is my version of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, I didn't know it was my version of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I thought it was AA. I mean, why would I ever have settled for my own version of AA? I thought that what I knew about Alcoholics Anonymous was the thing to do. And that was, if I didn't want to drink or use, it was necessary for me to go to meetings. And that it was necessary for me to have a higher power and pray and have faith, and it was necessary for me to go to meetings. I really didn't, and so that's what I was doing. I really didn't understand, though, that wasn't the whole picture of what my problem was. My problem is that when I take a drink of alcohol, my body reacts with a physical craving for more, and that I cannot control my drinking once I start to drink because my body reacts to the substance alcohol differently than other people. Turns out my body reacts differently to other substances as well, different from other people. But this is AA. That wasn't my only problem, though, because the solution to that problem is to quit drinking, which I did many times. Only alcoholics have it that quit is temporary. To everyone else in the world, they quit something, that's it. That's the end of them doing it, right? Me, I quit over and over and over and over again, and that isn't even the definition of the word quit, right? But I was a quitting fool, right? I quit over and over and over again, and I intended never to drink again. But I have another problem. My problem isn't just that when I drink alcohol, I can't control how much I drink and I get drunk. My problem is that I cannot see the truth just before I take a drink. That just before picking up the first drink, my mind believes it's going to be fine. It's never been fine. There isn't a single instance in my life where I have taken a drink and it's turned out just fine. It's almost always never ended until I was in the backseat of a police car. That's my story. I know it's not everybody's story, but that's how it was for me. I started drinking, and it did not end until I was in the backseat of a police car. And sometimes that was a couple of nights later, and sometimes that was a couple of weeks later, a couple of months later. But it didn't stop until that happened. And then I would wake up on the cold concrete floor of the Broward County Jail swearing, absolutely, that was the last time, I'm never doing it again. And then they'd let me out. And then a couple weeks later, I would have a beer in my hand. And that did not stop until I was in the backseat of another police car. And so my problem isn't that alcohol disagrees with me and I need to go to some meetings and pray and have faith in order to hopefully not drink again. The problem is bigger than that. The problem is that I am absolutely powerless over alcohol. I can't control it once I start, and I cannot quit. And my life is this living testament to that fact. Like this, once I got that information, I was at a Big Book study, listening to a couple of old timers talk about the Big Book. I'd listened to old timers and I'd listened to people talk about the Big Book before, but my mind wasn't open the way that it was this particular time, right? And so I'm sitting there listening to these couple of guys talk about the Big Book, and they're talking about the doctor's opinion. And they're describing the allergy and the obsession and how, the powerless concept. And all of a sudden, I'm like, holy shit, I am an alcoholic. And I didn't understand. Like, I didn't know. Like, up until that point in time, I thought I was a drug addict going to AA because there were more of those meetings closer to my house. That's God's honest truth. I'm a crackhead. And I thought that I was just going to AA because there were more meetings closer to home. And I was on a bicycle. I didn't have a driver's license, and it was tough to get the meetings. And here I'm listening to these guys describe what alcoholism is, and I'm like, holy cow, that's my problem exactly. And with this information, with information about the hours of the body and the obsession of the mind, I'm looking back at my past and realizing I'm not even a drug addict who's going to AA. I am an alcoholic. And this isn't every drug addict's story. Some drug addicts have completely different stories. But my story was that I wasn't really a drug addict as much as I was an alcoholic. That yes, once I started smoking crack, it was Katie bar the door, right? I don't know, something about saying smoking crack in AA that I just love. And here's the thing: it shouldn't, and nobody should be offended by it, because the reality of this story is that that's not my problem. I don't smoke crack unless I'm drunk. That's not what happens to me. The order that it happens to me is that I think it's okay to have a couple of beers. I think it's okay to go out with my friends from my new job that I've had for a week and a half now since I've been out of jail. And it's okay this evening to go out with them after work and have a few beers because, you know what, things are going so well, I couldn't possibly screw this up. And bam, they would be going home at 10:30 at night, and I am like going to town. Like I have a different experience drinking than they do, and so the problem isn't that I just can't drink and I gotta pray and have faith and go to meetings. The problem is that I am screwed. I'm doomed. I have an insurmountable problem. I cannot control it, and I cannot quit. And here's the thing: I'm finding out this information with more than a year sober, sitting in AA, going, "Holy shit, I'm an alcoholic." For the first time, I didn't just realize that I'm really an alcoholic and not a drug addict. I realized what it meant to be powerless. I realized what they've been talking about in AA the whole time I've been here. Right? I realized that this deal is a lot different than I thought it was. It meant that I'm screwed. It meant that I'm doomed. Because I knew to a man at that same time that I hadn't had this spiritual experience that they were talking about, that I had not taken the steps of the program as they were describing them in that big book. I knew that I had not done that work and that I had not had that experience. And so I'm sitting there knowing I'm a dead man unless something dramatic changes. And so I understood that I was powerless over alcohol when I got that information, when I listened to that information for the first time. And at the same time, I was also willing to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. I listened to them talk about what AA's solution is. And AA's solution is a spiritual experience. In AA, it comes as a result of the steps, but that's AA's solution. It turns out that the people who had overcome this thing and wrote the big book, that was their story. They weren't just. I always thought AA was like a couple of drunks got together and just made up AA, or I don't know. There was this guy Bill and this guy Bob, and they just got together and put this together for us. I had no idea. That's not what the big book is, and that's not what happened. The big book is the story of what happened in the 1930s. That we went for centuries with alcoholism without any recovery. And then all of a sudden, in the 1930s, recovery from alcoholism starts to happen large scale, starts to grow. This movement that we are now a part of in AA starts to grow. And the big book is the story of what happened and how. And that story, these folks who were these early AAs had spiritual experiences because they were practicing some spiritual principles that they learned from the Oxford groups. They were practicing inventory and confession and making amends and prayer meditation and helpfulness to others. They had the basics of the AA principles that they were practicing, and they were helping one another, one and then another, and one and then another practice these spiritual principles, and they were having spiritual experiences or spiritual awakenings, and they were staying sober. And when enough of them were sober, they looked around at each other and said, "Holy shit, we're onto something." This isn't a time. If you take a look at the language of the book, Alcoholics Anonymous, alcoholism is described as a hopeless condition of mind and body. This is the language that was used in the 1930s. This is a hopeless condition. Society knows that if you're an alcoholic, you're screwed, that there's no hope for you other than jails and being committed to institutions. Or dying. There was no help for us. There was nothing that society had to help us. And then here's 40 of them looking around going, "Holy cow, we're all sober still. We're on to something." And so they put together their experience in a book called Alcoholics Anonymous. And the first step is that I am powerless. The second step is I came to believe that a power greater than myself can restore me to sanity. The only thing to do, if you conceive of those two pieces of information, if you have enough information about the problem to know you're powerless, and you have enough information about the solution to believe that it's possible that a power greater than ourselves can restore us to sanity, then there isn't really anything left to do other than to decide to do what's necessary in order to have that solution. And that's really what step 3 is. Step 3 is a decision to go through the rest of the steps in the hopes of receiving direction from a power greater than ourselves for our lives so that we can have that spiritual experience. And once I understood I was powerless, I was actually able to do step 3. You know, it's funny because the way the 12 and 12 talks about step 3 is a lot different than what I would have ever thought. But the 12 and 12 talks about step 3 in a way that unless somebody can repeatedly try step 3, right? Well, I didn't have the sense of desperation or the sense of urgency to repeatedly turn towards a higher power, or repeatedly turn towards my sponsor or towards the steps for the answer to my problem until I understood that I was powerless. Once I understood that I was screwed unless this happened, there was the sense of urgency. Now all of a sudden I'm participating like somebody, you know, who's drowning and you're throwing him a life preserver, right? Now I'm participating like that. And so I was able to actually take step 3. I feel like I never took step 3, even though technically I had done a 3rd step prayer with my sponsor. Technically I had done an altar call as well. I, thought that I believed in God and had given my life to him. But honestly, until I understood what step 1 was, I never really took step 3 experientially. So of course my new sponsor from the Big Book, guy, we did the 3rd step prayer together, and his immediate response was, "We'll see." Because he's seen guys like me come over and over and over again saying, "Yes, I've decided to turn my will and my life for the care of God. Yes, God, please take me as I am and do with me as you will." And he's seen guys like me utter those words and have that conversation and then do nothing about it. Over and over and over again, he's seen guys like me show up in AA saying they've decided to turn their will and their life over the care of God and do nothing about it. And you know what? Up to that point, I was one of them. But this time, he showed me how to do a 4th step. He said, what he actually said was that if I came back with my 4th step done, ready to do a 5th step, then he'll know that I have decided to turn my will and my life over to the care of God. Because what is a decision unless you affirm it with action, right? And the action of step 3 is the 4th step. The action of step 3 is 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. The 3rd step, we're simply deciding to turn our will and life over to the care of God. The rest of the steps are the how we do that, and that was a meaningless proposition unless I actually came back with that done. In my case, I did not come back with it done. I did come back with it started and a lot of questions, though, which was the best I could do at the time. I had little trouble wrapping my head around the 4th step, but I got through it. And it was the first time I ever looked at my life from the perspective of being responsible for everything that had happened. I really didn't even understand the concept of being personally responsible for my life. It's funny because I was absolutely irresponsible and absolute victim. I heard one of my home group members last night said I spoke perfect victimese when I got here, and that mirrors me. I spoke perfect victimese. Everything about my life was somebody else's fault. Even the fact that I couldn't succeed, like I actually had it in my head that life was set up in such a way that a guy like me just can't win. Now I never had that complete thought run through my head, but looking back at me and my thinking, my attitude, my beliefs, that was absolutely how I had it. And the 4th step was the first time I ever actually looked at my life from a point of view of responsibility. And the funny thing is that up until that time, not only did I not have any experience with looking at my life from the point of view of responsibility, but I would have ran the other way as soon as I even could perceive of being responsible for something. I would have just looked the other way. I was absolutely terrified of being responsible. And now it's completely different. Like now I look for how I'm responsible because, when I can see that I am responsible, then I can find something to work on. As long as it's their fault, there's nothing I can do. Right? I am just still a victim, right? So I look for, even if it's a small part, I look for how I'm responsible for things, which was a sea change in my attitude and behavior. I took that inventory and shared that and confessed that with another person and with God. I unloaded not just the details of things that I had done to hurt other people and the resentments and the fears and how petty and foolish they were. But the often the tougher part for me actually was that last part, how petty and pathetic the motives and the thinking were that ran my life. Really, that was the tough part. The things that I had done, I had shared with people before, but the reasons I had done them, I had not. I never really got to them in my inventory, and this time I did. The whole point of 4 and 5 is to put the past in the past. The whole point of that is to see myself clearly how it's been, and really just and most people many people have spiritual experiences after step 5. I didn't have any white light spiritual experience, but when I was completed with step 5, I knew I was well on my way in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I felt good about the fact that I had finally accomplished something, having been introduced to the Big Book, having been a member of Alcoholics Anonymous without taking the action in the Big Book for a while, and then getting some information about the Big Book and actually taking hold of that and doing something real about it. I felt like my membership in Alcoholics Anonymous was solidified. I felt like I was on my way. That I finally done something that I said that I was going to do, because I'm not really good at that either. I'm not really good at doing things I say I'm going to do. But it really did. It put the past in the past. It gave me a perspective of how things have been that took a load off in order to have something new occur. Now, here's the thing. Something new doesn't just occur automatically in most cases. In many cases, maybe it did. Like in some things. Like the grossest versions of those character defects, the grossest behavior that stemmed from those character defects probably were eliminated at once. But the truth is that unchecked and unthought about, a lot of it persisted. Because I thought that I was done with that. I thought that was it. I did 6 and 7. I asked God to take me to something better. Boom. And God will do his work in his time, is how I thought about it. Now, I knew better. Intellectually, I knew better. I had been taught better. But experientially, I still participated in 6 and 7 exactly like that. I participated in 6 and 7 like they were, get ready, make a prayer, leave the results to God. And apparently that's not how it works. And this is one of the reasons why it's important. I'm a big book thumper. I'm a real big book thumper. I love, if I'm your sponsor, if I'm taking you through the steps, we're doing it exactly through the Big Book and not opening any other book, really. I'm not even opening the 12 and 12. There are some exceptions to that. But if I'm here's the exception. If I'm sponsoring a real reader, somebody who reads and comprehends well, and we're very difficult to find time, instead of explaining all the details of the instincts, I'll set them to read the first half of chapter 4 in the 12 and 12 as a primer for the instinct column in their inventory. But other than that, I don't even touch the 12 and 12. But 6 and 7, at step 6 and 7, even though I might not open the 12 and 12 with my sponsee, just about everything that I say about 6 and 7, I learned in the 12 and 12. 6 and 7 in the 12 and 12 is where I think I finally learned what the difference between the instructions in the Big Book are and what the 12 and 12 is really all about. The instructions in the Big Book are the directions for how to practice the steps, to how to go through the steps. The 12 and 12 is a book about what it's actually like to be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, applying those 12 steps to my life on a regular basis. And it's that context that 6 and 7 really lives. 6 and 7 is, what I learned about 6 and 7 was that I could not make the progress that I sought to make unless I was willing to be the person that I inventoried. I had to be the person that I inventory. right? And inventory in this sense is present tense. I took that picture of who I had been and buried it somewhere, hoping it would never see the light of day again, thinking that that was the end of that was all going to be in the past and everything else in the future. What a immature view of how life really is, right? And it took me a little while to figure out that that's not how this works at all. That I have to be the person that I am first. I have to, the 12 and 12 says we found the shoes that fit and we step into them. Well, that's not what I did. I found the shoes that fit and stuck them in the back of a closet, hoping never to be seen again. Like that's what I did, right? And I couldn't get there from there. Until I was willing to put those shoes on and be that person with the flaws and the things that were good going on at that time and be that person entirely, it's only from there, the place where the seventh step calls humility, right? Or even the definition of humility in the 12 and 12 is a clear recognition of who and what I really am, followed by a sincere attempt to become what I could be. It wasn't until I was willing to stand amongst my peers and amongst God as the person I really was, and from there ask God for help. From that place, look and see what's missing or what needs to be extracted, and ask God for help to do that. From there, I could make progress in 6 and 7. From there, I actually started to change. And 6 and 7 is where change happens. It seems, my friend Pat says the whole program really leads up to 6 and 7 and comes back to 6 and 7. And we're actually going to see that very, very quickly in step 10 in a couple of weeks. But this week, we're going to talk more about step 8. Now that more than half the meeting's gone. And even this step, I did not pay as much attention to. As I read the 12 and 12 today in step 8, I read that the 12 and 12 actually interprets the 8th step. If you read what the 12 and 12 says, it's actually asking us to redouble our efforts at step 4. It's actually asking us to inventory further. There are some questions that I haven't answered with respect to how and why I hurt these people. What instincts drove me to do so? These are people who are in my life or who have been in my life. And if it's not the same people, I'm going to be the same person repeating the same experiences with other people or the same people. And how is this going to change without me clearly seeing exactly how and in what ways I hurt people? And I know that this talks a little bit about step 9, but it's my experience in step 9, absent what I now see as the importance of step 8, that today informs step 8. And that is that step 9 was about making amends to these people. And we're going to talk a lot about that next week. Well, there was one particular amends that I had made to my father. Now, my father was a provider. My mother worked also later on, but when me and my brothers were smaller, my father was the provider, and my mother stayed home with us. And when we were old enough that she could go to work, she did. And my father fell on hard times. Our family fell on hard times. My father went from a BMW cell phone driving, and this is in the 80s, by the way. That's a big deal, right? My father went from a cell phone, BMW driving executive at a bank to scraping by and barely making ends meet for our family when the savings and loan crisis in the 80s happened and he lost his job. This man doing the very best he can to provide the same level of provide in the same way for us is somebody that I stole money from regularly, whose car I took out one time and wrecked, and he couldn't even afford the deductible to have it repaired. So now not only is he not driving his BMW, he's driving this Pontiac 2000 with a big dent in the fender, right? And my fault, right? That's what I did. So when I approached my family, when I approached my mother and father and made amends, I calculated up the costs of these things, apologized for having done it, and made a payment plan to pay it back, which was great. It was a great first step. But as I started to grow in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, as I started to help guys go through their steps and make amends, I started looking at this very, very differently. And eventually, somebody told a story that somebody in AA shared a story that embarrassed me. Embarrassed me about how I approached making amends to my father. In one way particularly, my father would have $60 in his wallet, maybe $66, let's say, he had in his wallet. And I would take 40 of it, just enough that hopefully he wouldn't notice until after he was out of the house. Cunning, baffling alcoholic. Here's what I never considered, even well after I thought I had completed my amends. I never considered what it was like to show up at lunch with somebody you had an appointment with and not have the cash in your wallet to cover it. What, does paying the money back fix that? No, it doesn't even come close, right? Until I started to see just how and in what ways I actually harmed people, I had very little insight into how to appropriately make amends to them. And so my advice to you, what I do with the guys that I work with is even from day one, before we're ever even at step 10 or step 8 or step 9, start to do the things that have been missing. My parents didn't even hear from me until I had been in jail for 3 months. I was in jail for 3 months in Georgia. My parents hadn't heard a peep from me. Now, part of that was good because I wasn't calling them, asking them for stuff. Because I don't know about you. I don't know how you were with your parents and family members in the midst of your addiction. But the only time my parents ever heard from me is when I was in trouble or I needed something. That was when they heard from me. And usually enough time had passed between them hearing from me that they were glad to hear from me. But also, fortunately for me, my parents they never enabled me. My mother went to one tough love meeting, just one, and learned just enough to know to leave me out there to struggle. And she did. And I'm telling you, I've been sober since I was 19 years old. There's no way that that's possible if I had parents who were bailing me out of jail, hiring attorneys, and helping me get out of those scrapes. It's not possible. There's no way I'm sober at 19 years old if I have those parents. Right? I don't have those parents. So the terror that I persistently inflicted on my parents had to do with worry, not hearing from me for a long time, finally seeing me weighing 125, 130 pounds. I mean, the terror and the worry that they felt is when I was around them for any length of time, and then I disappeared, there usually was stuff missing. Maybe some of you don't know anything about that, but when my parents had me back in their home, my parents did do one thing. If my ass was in a sling and I was really committed to doing right and following the rules, my parents would always let me back in. I got two very clear messages from them. They loved me very much, and they would always do whatever they could to help me. And B, they would not put up with one iota of my BS. As soon as I started drinking again or not following the rules of their house, out the door I went. They would not have it, and they would not bail me out of jail, and they would not hire attorneys to get me out of these scripts. They just never participated in anything like that. There was a thought there. It's gone. It's just gone. So the terror that I inflicted on my mother and father, I don't think I had real insight into until I was well past step 9. And I had thought I had completed my 9th step with them. I had paid them back. I had made my apologies. Paying them back took a little time because I had stolen a lot of crap. But even while I was well into that, I really thought that was the end of it. And then here I am in AA, listening to somebody else share and thinking, oh my God, there's still so much missing. And so in order to put in the things that were missing, I had to understand more about what it was like to live with me, what it was like to have me as a son. And until I understood what it might have been like, there's no way I could actually possibly understand what it's actually like to have me as a son, right? I couldn't even fathom. But until I started to look for how it must have felt and how it must have been to experience me as a son, I could not actually do, say, be, in any consistent fashion, somebody who clearly wasn't that anymore. And so it took a while, but eventually I started to stay in touch with my folks regularly, go over or call and just do things for them. That's not me. That's not my MO. I call when I need something. That's what I do, right? But a window into what it was like to have me as a son, that wasn't going to cut it anymore. I was going to have to say yes when my parents asked for stuff, and I was going to have to make a call just to see how they were, or pay attention to an important thing that they have coming up in their life, and call and see how that turned out. Send cards or gifts at Christmas and birthdays. My brothers and I had a pact not to get anything for each other for birthdays or holidays. It was a pact to be selfish, really, as I started later on, and I broke the pact. I says, what? I can't repair the damage that I've done and keep that pact. There's no way for me to make amends to my brothers for what it was like to have me as a brother, unless I reached out to them the several times a year where they had things coming up in their lives, or birthdays or holidays or things like that, and I could do something for them. Where at least they knew I was thinking about them. Because my disease, and not just my disease, like it's alcohol and drugs' fault, because this was the case even in early sobriety, my selfishness, my condition had me thinking that it didn't matter. It wasn't important what was going on in their lives, right? Now, if you asked me, is it important? Absolutely, it's important. I actually thought it was important and felt it was important. I just didn't act like I thought it was important or felt it was important. And I had to start acting like I thought it was important and I felt it was important to know what was going on in their lives and call to see how their kids were doing. And this one graduated, I heard, this one, did good in school, or, had some monumental thing happen. My brothers both have kids. I don't have any kids. Thank God. Really. For them, for kids everywhere. Thank God I don't have any kids. I actually, one time, I called into a radio show. It was actually, never mind. But they were talking, it was after the Menendez brothers had killed their parents, right? And they were talking about how kids are the product of their upbringing and product of their parents. And I could, of course they've got, different opinions on the radio, coming in and out. And I couldn't disagree with this more, right? Because my parents are like the epitome of, good, Catholic, middle class, follow the rules, do the right thing. There's no way the way that I was raised or their parenting spawned me. Like it just, I did not come from that. Like this, I am an anomaly in this scenario. And so I actually said that the reason I don't have kids is because I believe in karma on this radio show. And I think it's true. There's just no way. I would kill me. I would absolutely kill me. So one of the things I started doing with the guys that I sponsor is to take the list of the people that we inventory and start listing not only what we did, but the impact that that's had on their lives. To actually take stock of it. And so this is what I learned to do, is to actually take stock of how I've hurt them. There's a distinction between what I did wrong and how that hurts them. To me, it's the distinction between the wrong and the harm. The wrong is what I did or didn't do. The harm is the impact that that's had on their lives. And once I started to measure in any meaningful way exactly how I've harmed people, not just what I've done wrong. Because what I was doing wrong in making amends is I was apologizing for what I had done without contemplating how I had actually hurt them. Right? How I actually hurt them is a different story. Until I started to look at how my actions have hurt them and started to see what it might have been like to be them having me as a son, I started coming up with ways to make amends that were more meaningful. And so what happened is that I started making amends, especially to my dad again, in ways that he did not understand or know that I was making amends to him. As a matter of fact, it still goes on every now and again. So one of the things that I do in order to try to make it okay or try to correct the wrong is that, I'm a self-employed, I'm not wealthy by any stretch of the imagination, but I do reasonably well and very often have cash in my pocket. And I don't see my dad very often, but whenever it is the case that I am over there and I have cash in my pocket, one of the things that I do is slip 40 or 60 bucks in his wallet, which I still know where he keeps because that's just who I am. And so I don't know. I don't know if that's the correct thing to do. I know that I've paid him back all the money that I've taken, but you know what he didn't get to have? He didn't get to have the experience of reaching in his wallet thinking he only had $25 and finding $65. He didn't get to have that. And the only way that I could correct what I did is, I felt, to give him that experience at least, a dozen times. It's not like I do that all the time. I don't, but I do it. I've done it maybe 8 to 10 times, maybe up to now. But I'll continue to do it because it's fun. And here's the thing. My dad never said anything when I stole the money. And he never said anything when he found more. He's never said anything either way. There's no joy in doing it. But I just know one of these times I'm going to hear about it, or I don't know, I just feel like it's still fun to do. And so, that's until I started actually looking at not just what I did wrong, but the impact that my actions and my way of being sometimes. Sometimes I don't do anything that you could just pinpoint as wrong. It's just who I am and how I'm being, in a situation that's wrong. Either, on my phone, not showing up to the family gathering, all kinds of things. There's all kinds of ways that I steal time and love from my brothers and sisters and mother and father. Mother's passed now, but that I had to start looking at and correcting. Until I started to do that, those relationships, the changes were only surface changes. Yeah, my parents, when I was there at Christmas and got gifts and family dinners and all of that stuff, but it didn't actually turn into the meaningful relationship that a son has with his mother and father until after I started actually taking stock of how I had actually harmed them and started looking at ways to make amends for that. That's when the real differences started happening in those relationships. And I guess in a very real way, it's probably when and how I grew up in ways that I woke up to what's most important in relationships, period, right? It's not about what I get, it's about what I give. It's not about, stuff. It's about interaction and love and compassion and joy and peace and camaraderie. And it's just, the things that I tend to cherish most in my life now is those relationships that I have at the depth and level that I have them, more than all of the stuff that I've used to think was so important. And I don't think that lesson ever went from here to here until I started making the changes in how I made amends to people. And that started not in the 9th step, it starts in the 8th step. And actually looking at the distinction between the wrong and the harm. And so I started to tell you a little while ago, one of the things I have some of the guys that I sponsor do, especially those that aren't living near home and they've been addicts for a while or alcoholics for a while and they're estranged from their wife and their children or their parents or whatever the situation is, from day one, start sending the birthday cards, start sending the Valentine's cards, start letting them know you're thinking about them on their birthdays and at Thanksgiving and at Christmas, and even if it's not reciprocated, even if they don't want to hear from you, just send the card, send the letter, let them know you were thinking about them. Just keep dropping it out there, because and what I found was that until I started to do that consistently, right? A lot of what I said was just air coming off my lips, right? That people, my family knew me well, and they and look, it's not because I've always apologized, right? My parents knew that an apology just meant that I was about to ask for something. I mean, that's just kind of how it was, right? And so that wasn't going to cut it anymore. Something else had to take place, and it wasn't until I started really taking a look at step 8 and actually how I've hurt people that I could actually start to see what needed to take place. Thanks for letting me share.
Let's give Brian a warm thank you again. Awesome job. Thank you. It's 8:55, and we will be passing the basket, which is the 7th tradition. And I've asked Bernie if he will come up and do the chips while the basket. Pardon? Okay. Yeah, while the basket's being passed, we'll do the chips. So.
Just do what you're told. Stop trying to run the show.
Bernie, alcoholic.
Hey, Bernie.
In AA, we have a chip system. Represents if you're drinking, you're probably gambling with your life and milestones of sobriety. Is there anyone in here who would like to give up the fight and pick up a white chip? No? Okay. Anybody have 3 months? Red chip? 6 months? Blue? Gold chip for 9 months? Chuck? Okay. Anybody celebrating an AA anniversary today, this week, this month?
Scott, 22.
Hey. Anybody else? Okay. You guys know the drill. Meeting, sponsor, read the big book. Listen to Brian every Friday night. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Bernie. Thank you, Bernie. And while Chuck is standing up here, no need for him to go to the back because he will be reading the promises for us.
Alcoholic Chuck. The AA promises, if we are painstaking about this phase of our development, we will be amazed before we are halfway through. We're going to know new freedom and new happiness. We will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word serenity and we will know peace. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. That feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. We will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. Self-seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Fear of people and economic insecurity will leave us. We will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. We will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. Are these extravagant promises? They are being fulfilled among us, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, but they will always materialize if we work for them.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And now we will close with the Lord's Prayer. For those of you who care to join us.